Okay.
Hello, Nick. Welcome.
Hey, Markus. Great pleasure to talk, to see you.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. I've been doing this podcast as sort of as a reaction to the fact that musicians like us, we're not on stage anymore.
Right.
Well, you have your own club, at Exil in Zurich, and you still get to play Monday nights, right? uh, under special circumstances, I guess. I don't know what the rules are for you right now in Switzerland. But for me, it's been really it's almost a year now without a live show. And it's really crazy. Like before I started touring much, I was touring
Yeah.
almost nothing, But now, but yeah, it's crazy. It's like going back to an old life. And how is that for you nowadays?
Well, first of all, we are in Zurich, in Switzerland. We have similar rules like in Germany at the moment. So everything is closed. Theaters, venues, live stages are all closed, at least in another months. We expect, or even more. And that's since October the case. So also my club is closed. We just continued with the Monday series with the concert every Monday via live stream. We did that actually already before the pandemic. We had a partner, YourStage.live, who was experimenting with underground, interesting off-culture shows. And we started that already 2 years before the crisis broke out. So we were really good prepared. And last year, also in spring, when everything was closed, we were continuing with the live stream. And now we are also continuing. So we have with the bands sometimes also a smaller lineup. We have the possibility to play still every week for that live stream. We are rehearsing, and that's, as you said, is very important, so that we can keep the shape and also be a bit really on the concert front to still experiment with our music under live conditions. For me personally, of course, I didn't travel also anymore, and we had just a phase that was ended with the last Ronin record of Asse. We were touring a lot, so we expected 2020 to be a little more calm, although we would have, of course, many concerts. But so it didn't hit us in the middle of a tour. But also for us, it's a big challenge since, as you know, a working band needs to play and needs to continuously play and also do tours to grow as a team.
Yes, yes. And I don't know how you run your band financially, but it's also, like you need to have the income to keep things rolling. And like the musicians in the band, are sort of like dependent on the structures that, that the touring circuit kind of like provides. And
Exactly.
yeah, and it's challenging. So, I don't really want to spend too much time talking about the pandemic and what it does to us, but we will probably always come back to it a few times. Like my main idea really for today is to maybe kind of like go into details that are not so interesting for the general public.
Okay.
um, so and I really didn't, even though we talk almost every week, I didn't know you had the new solo album coming out,
Right.
which will come out in a few weeks, right, in March.
Yeah.
And so I listened to the preview track, and so first of all, what kind of piano is that? Which brand of piano?
This is a Steinway, but it was the old Steinway that actually was at the radio studio Lugano, and producer Manfred Eicher and myself had the chance to check two pianos in there. There's a more modern one that might be a bit lighter and a bit brighter also, but we both actually liked the old one very much. That was more colorful and, for my taste, more responding with the space. So it has its challenges, but it also gives a lot to work with and to really listen into the sound. I felt just more comfortable with that, and we both agreed when we decided which piano to take that this is the one.
Yeah,
Actually, it's the same that is on Continuum, I think, also on the Mobile album, but I did not know that in the beginning.
interesting. Yeah, because I think the record, or at least the one track I heard, sounds so incredibly soft texturally. It would really,
Right.
I would even say it's like a new sound, a little bit of a new sound for you.
Yeah, true. I mean, that has also to do with the fact I'm happy that you heard that and you checked it out, because it has, of course, to do with the fact that I play alone, which means I can also bring in all the qualities that have that I learned and developed over the years from classical chamber music and the sound culture, that with a little kind of touch already creates things, but with attack, with listening, with movements, you can vary in a really huge thing. And for example, when I play with Mobile or with more percussion instruments, but especially then with Ronin amplified, this variety is very different. It's a different, almost a different instrument how I treat it when I play. But by playing a piano in the way I work with composition and improvisation, can really show the whole variety in correspondence in work with the instrument. That also gives you a lot of back what you bring into it.
Yes. I say that like with this background that I first heard you play live in 2006. I think that's when we met. So it's 15 years that we've known each other. And I think just the development that you have made in your compositional style, and also the way you lead the band, and also you could say even the style that the band plays in, which is very interesting. So now arriving at this pure acoustic piano, grand piano sound, which has these wonderfully soft, kind of like almost pastel colors, which sort of obviously then reminds me of say like Debussy, like in a way, is I find it's a really interesting and sort of I have to say unexpected direction, and it's really wonderful. And so just because I'm curious, in the production of that record, the recording, was there anything special about that, or was that sort of like a straight setup?
It's quite straight. We have just two mics there, and there's also not a lot of treatment of the sound. But with what we were working together with sound engineer Stefano Omerio, who usually does the more classical or the recordings in that setting. We worked a lot on how the piano is placed in the space. Of course, there are also ambient mics there, but how that we felt actually comfortable to play what came back to my ears from the space, but also how this was then seen and heard in the studio from the producer and the sound engineer, so that we had an optimal kind of acoustic atmosphere that I felt comfortable to play, but also that had the right resonance. And the Radio Studio Lugano is a beautiful studio that is actually mainly for classical music or chamber music, jazz and things. There are legendary recordings, also classical piano recordings made in there. And as you know, it depends sometimes if the piano is a little bit more to the right or to the left, what comes back. You cannot mark this and it's every time the same. It depends very much on the momentum, what happens in there. And we took our time to organize that. And then it was quite natural what comes back from the playing, from this attitude of listening, and from a natural way of let's say, old school way of how you work with music. No cuts, not many takes. I have, I think, 3 first takes on the record, and the others were second takes or so. So that was for us very important to accept what is there, but with highest attention and focus and joy of what then resonates.
Yes, yes. So how did you choose the pieces you wanted to record?
That's a very important and precise question, actually, because I wanted to improvise and to work with my music that is quite structured, and composition plays a big role. But of course, over the last decades almost, I started to really work freely with that, especially when I'm alone and I can go wherever I like. I wanted to create a record that has an outlook to the future in a way that I can really freely treat the composed material, but also shows the now in terms of what I can do. I think I was really on the good level of what I can play. I cannot play better, but I also usually don't play worse. So what we hear on the record is quite the level I can do now. But also it's a record that looks back, and I wanted to create some recordings of reference, like for example for module 5 and module 26 and module 13 that are on the record also, because these pieces start to be played by other pianists more and more from the classical field, but also in the in-between field of jazz players or time players and classical players. And I wanted to give a recording of reference, like we have so many actually on ECM also, that show a piece on the level, how it's done, played by the composer or a group close to the composer. So I wanted to show this mix and have also one piece on the record that gives respect to the bands and to my work with ECM over the last time. Actually, when we met 2006, our first record came out, Stoa, the first Ronin record on ECM. So the last piece that has a different name is kind of a reference, look back of this story behind this name. Déjà Vu Vienna is of course hidden a module, and this module was one of the most important from the band in relation to ECM. And it is a piece that it has at the end of the record that looks back to the beginning of the record. So it has also this relation, like in a film when all the names are coming and at the end you reflect what happened in the film. This last piece is also for that. So for me, it was a record that showed all these aspects, and I knew I could not force that. So I was a bit, I was in high expectation what will happen, but finally to accept what comes out of the resonance of the moment helped us a lot to create that finally round dramaturgy of the whole record.
Interesting, because I obviously I have no idea which tracks are on the album, but you're saying that there's one that is not called a module, but right, that references the module and has sort of like more of a conceptual, or more concrete title, but at the same time it's more of a mystery if people don't know what it's referring to.
Right. So, that probably happens. So I usually have just modules and then suddenly there's a title. Yes, exactly. Maybe also a bit self-ironic, but also in a deep way. Yeah.
Yes. So sounds to me as if it's sort of like a review, as you say, of material, and also like this term reference recording, which you've used quite a few times also in our discussions. And
I think it's a bit similar like on your record, on my label, where you wanted to show what you actually did in a certain time and on what level this already was and how you thought about music in that time. So although it's a newer recording, you were referring to your development and showing in a way how far this already was in the very beginning, and then people can relate it to your development. So this is sometimes very difficult to do on one record, but for me it was this tension between the outlook to the future for me as a player, to work with improvisation, composition, and interpretation, but also looking back and saying this is a recording of reference for some of my compositions.
Yeah, exactly. And you're also totally naked on that record, being just the sole performer with,
right,
like you say, no edits and yeah. So maybe like the interesting aspect about being a musician, I find, is that a lot of people that hear the music, or they project ideas. They project their ideas and also their understanding of musical concepts, or also of musical ability, in very, very interesting and sometimes very, very various ways. And so one of the comments that I've always found to be like really, really bizarre about music is when people say this is simple music, right?
Yeah.
Like the word simple. And when it comes to what you do, like even if we take the simplest module, right?
Yeah.
But the way you execute it is like the word simple has no place there initially. So I think like you have acquired a sort of effortlessness within this field and this sort of approach that you, among others, kind of like have pioneered. But I really have so much respect for the fact that you have really, really, really made something look extremely easy and sound fluent and light and simple,
Yeah.
that is really, in a way, and correct me if I'm wrong, because like I'm just going to use this word, which is sort of like, in a way, a little bit superhuman.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I say that because and I'm not talking generally, like maybe not 150 years ago, like an artist, like a musician would have time to practice, I don't know, like 12 hours per day for 40 years, right? But it's not like that anymore. And
Yeah.
so Nik Bärtsch, as a father and like a businessman, and all these things that you do, and you at the same time, you still manage to be on that high level, but not just stay there, but you go further. And you kind of like demonstrate that with this new solo record. I find that very fascinating, and I would like to talk with you about that. So how do you do what you do?
Well, thank you, first of all, but I think that's a challenge we all have. First, I like in the English language, there is the difference between simple and simple-minded. We don't have that in German, actually, but simplicity can be used as a form of clearness, directness, honest way of playing on your level, or it can be used as a strategy to say things have to be simple and people are not so intelligent, or music is too complex, we need to make it simple. So that's, for me, more simple-minded. It just shows a certain mind attitude. That's not what I'm looking for, and we are not looking for. We are looking to a simplicity that has a clearness, and through this speaks very directly. And this does not necessarily mean that it's not complex under the surface. So for us as players, this tension, I think, is important. We want to have we're looking for a certain mastership. We're working on our level constantly as composers, as players. And that's the way of simplicity. Finally, we have, you called it effortlessness. It just shows what happens. We all know that we see a performer and the guy is on the edge and we fear a bit, he's sweating and we fear with him as an audience. That's one level. Next level is that somebody plays really eclectic and you think you never could do that yourself. It's too extreme. The guy is a genius. And then we have the third level when you just listen and you don't think about all of that. You just enjoy the music. Everything works natural. You had a good evening, but then when you, after the concert at home and in bed, you feel a certain clearness and connectedness to everything, because it was just there. You were on the right spot. Everything happens. So that's what I'm looking for, and I think we all do when we play music, because we want to make a concert where everybody thinks I'm at the right place on the earth now in that moment. That's also, I think, our job as players to support this feeling of togetherness in a space. So this is very important. And then the next point you named was the superhuman thing, which I think does not tend so much into the direction of a guy is a genius because he or she can do something really extraordinary, but it shows more that you transcend your ego and you transcend the way of seeing yourself in the center by making music. And I think what we are looking for when we are as solo players in connection with the music, but also when we play as a band, as a higher organism, we are looking to for transcending this ego attitude. To put, it's not necessarily bad, an ego and the I is also helps for several things in everyday life. And I don't think so much Zen Buddhistic, this is bad or good. I just think it doesn't help in certain situations when we want to be really directly connected with music. And that's what I find interesting when you call that superhuman. It is a way of trying to be there for the music and for the resonance, for the partnership between a listener and a player. And as we know, the player should also be the listener sometimes to really reflect what's happening. Now, this state of presence is what I'm looking for. And you're right, especially in this 5812, the first piece on the record that is already now out, that you can have a listen, has this very beautifully in. It's a connection of the player with the music, and not so much of Nik as a genius or important guy in music business or whatever. It just happens on the level of natural love for resonance and for connection for each other. And this is why we try to train the playing, why I also have to find, as a father, as a businessman, as a band leader, as a composer, my time to dedicate to this attitude by playing and training. And you can do that on a high level, that you don't need 12 hours of rehearsing or repetition or training. You can do that in a few hours and also in phases, and you can dedicate your life to several things that actually help for that attitude, like, for example, some sort of movement training or martial arts, in my case, or whatever. Then the muscles in connection with the mind can create that connection very directly.
Yeah, I understand what you mean, but let's go and be a little more concrete. Okay, so if we just think about the way that you practice or prepare, let's say prepare a recording like this solo album, how do you do that?
Well, that's a bit of a special case. I waited for years for the right moment for such a solo album, and I made a lot of experiences in the last few years by playing solo, smaller audiences, bigger spaces, amplified solo play, not amplified solo play. So I collected a lot of live experience compared to my first solo album, which I did, I think, in 2002 or something. And then this moment came in the development of the bands, because when you do a solo recording, you have also to be too careful, in my case, that it is not in competition with the bands. I mean, the bands are very important. Mobile as an acoustic band and Ronin as an amplified, more direct band. And I don't want to disturb these developments by suddenly only doing solo. It's another aspect of the way how I work. But also, I think in terms of what I wanted to say, it was time for a solo recording and I also don't know how long I cannot do all of that. So I thought it's a good moment. I more felt it in a way, and it also resonated with the ECM and producer Manfred Eicher, and so we created that solo record. So on one hand, I was prepared already since I had a lot of shows. I had these big shows in New York or in London at the Barbican together with visual artist Sophie Clemens, where we developed a certain setup for the piano, and I was in a different role as a player also than in a normal classical hall or jazz club. But on the other hand, my way of physically training also changed in the last years, and I usually prepare practicing by a lot of physical things, physical exercises without the piano. So this has more to do with flow training, attitude, breathing, way of sitting, acting on the piano, feeling that here in the whole body. Usually this takes 30 minutes to an hour before I start to practicing, and then maybe I practice for 45 minutes or something, make a break, drink something, move again, and then maybe another hour, and then it's okay. That's enough. Then I'm super warm and things flow. And when I do that over certain days, it already gives my fingers a big presence that I can do what I want. But when you really train for a recording, then maybe I have another hour or two later in the day where I do that, or I go for walking or doing things that keep my whole body more in flow. So that's the practical thing. Of course, I do a lot of stuff also on the piano, but also there trying more to work on the movements coming out of the center, and not so much on the technical aspect that is here in the fingers. It's more about the connection with the body. And the way I practice and play and develop that has also to do a lot with the fact how I listen and how I can enjoy that and be really there. And when I feel that I get exhausted or distracted too much by my own thoughts or something else, then I stop and try to find this attitude again. Like this, I can actually use less time with high intensity to really be honest in finding my presence with the instrument. Now, this sounds easy, and you can of course work on that with meditation and a lot of physical training, but it has also to do with a lot of experiences under difficult conditions, or with life experiences that were really difficult for me, injuries with my back, with the arms, personal things in my personal life, to deal with children situations, with pain and things like that. So all of that helps me to enjoy the moment of practicing very much. It's the how I feel that in the body that I have now time and space to practice. So you know that since you have now also a child, and it's beautiful, but it's also a challenge. And suddenly when you're with your instrument, it gives you also a certain different perspective on it.
Yeah, for sure. So when you like this mode of practicing that you just described, where you work, on movements and with the body first, and then you go to the instrument and you take a break and you go back to the instrument, etc., etc. Do you usually, is that sort of like a routine you try to do like most of the time, or is this something where you could say, okay, maybe sometimes you have like a few weeks where you don't play at all, and then you kind of like get back to it, or have you kind of like managed to install this as sort of like a continuous activity, let's say, in your life?
I would say usually it's really good to have a continuity also for the body. The older you get, the more this is actually important. I include also a lot of rhythm training with shakering and polymetric training in the body, sometimes with the instrument, sometimes alone, just standing or things like that. So the continuity is really important. So it's better to do every day a bit than everything at once. That's totally clear. But there are phases, like now I'm finishing a book about actually a lot of these aspects too. So I had to take sometimes a few days of really intense working on the book where I couldn't practice it. But I always physically moved. So I always make stretching. I always do a bit of flow training and things like that. Otherwise, I just cannot think and lose myself very quickly. But in these phases, I'm not at the piano very often. But despite that intense phases, I try to constantly be a bit there, touch. The simple fact when I hear a note that I calm down helps me also to deal with the rest of our challenges in life, and that heals me a little bit also when I have just time to listen to some piano notes.
Yeah, yeah. I recently had a conversation with a friend called Carl Sterling, who is a movement trainer for people with Parkinson's, for example.
Yeah.
And in the conversation, we came, we had the idea that also thoughts are movements, or you can kind of like work with thoughts as if they were movements. And I'd be interested in getting your perspective, for you being, I would say, like a real master in this field, for like what people call polyrhythms, right? Or you play like loops of different durations sort of at the same time, which again, correct me if I'm wrong, I guess like for me it's sort of like a listening thing. So I hear the parts and I can hear them independently, and then the hands or the movements, they can follow the imagination even, that's how it appears to me. But when it comes to like seeing thoughts as movements, I see that there's like a connection which goes in both directions, like from the body to the mind, and also in the other direction. How did you, like, if you really look back quite maybe even 35 years,
Yeah.
So how has your initial understanding of what I think must have been your interest pretty early on in life, how has this changed?
Well, these are several questions. First of all, I think 35 years ago, I was like 15, and this means there I was just very enthusiastic, training a lot. I started to really practicing a lot. I practiced usually 6 hours after school in that time for at least 4 or 5 years, and working on really classical development because I had no idea of classical music. But this also went into my own body. I was under strong tension, and I've always felt the kinetic and rhythmic drive, but I did not know how to deal with it. And when I then started studying classical music, which was a little wonder because I went into the exam and I had not really a lot of experiences compared to all these classical monsters. So I just did a modern music program and they took me, I think, because of this. And then I started to work in and move in this classical field of music, and it was really a challenge for me with all these sonatas every week, a new piece, a big piece, and I came really on to the edge of my physical capacity and also of the mental capacity, because then when tension rises, it gets complex. And I then started to do Feldenkrais method and started to do meditation and slowly developed into that direction where I'm still today. And so I would say 25 years ago, I felt that really clearly that I have to change something. I felt my affinities to rhythms already long as a child already. I also composed odd meter stuff as a child already, not consciously, but just I liked it. I was on a trip with my parents in Romania where we collected a lot of records, end of the 70s in communist Romania. So this was always there, but I didn't really explore it so much. And then I changed the piano teacher because I was lucky. I was in the pedagogic section. I had a a new teacher, and she was so interesting how she told me how I should teach others, that I thought I need to go directly to her. This was Erna Ronka, my teacher, who actually studied with Hubert Harry, a British teacher who was studying with Dinu Lipatti, the Romanian known pianist, very interesting pianist, how he plays with his movements. So then I started to really relatively late learn how to move, how to listen, and how to bring actually music, mind, and movement together. That's, by the way, also the title of the new book. It's called Listening, Music, Movement, Mind. And it's exactly about what you were talking about. So how can we bring that together? And how is a movement influenced by the way we think, by the way we listen? So then the journey really started already a few years of Feldenkrais method, this new way of weight play from the classical music background, starting doing Aikido and starting to go into more differentiated movement techniques like gyrotonic gyrokinesis, where you also learn with your mind to find the relevant muscles and to know them and to start to have your body under more control, but finally to let things flow. Mm-hmm. And then we are coming into a really interesting connection with thoughts, direction, dramaturgy, feeling, body knowledge, body thinking, and the transitions are fluid. And that's where where I still am. But I also watch a lot of films and about what you were talking about with Carl Sterling, about people who work with other people who had problems or disabilities and things. And my wife is also a shiatsu therapist and Aikido teacher, and I learn a lot from there too. What happens, and I try to include that in the way I train the music, I communicate the music, and I also from time to time teach some people in that. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Where has all of this taken you personally?
Well, I heard once I was in an exhibition about Japanese fashion in Switzerland. There's a fashion museum with mainly focus on fabrics and ways how fabrics are treated. And there I read a sentence by fashion designer Yoshi Yamamoto. He said, "I learned to accept my own style." And that's somehow, I think, with that solo record is now the point where I am. Looking back on this, also, I cannot explain many of the directions I took. I just can feel my affinities. And I'm maybe at that point at the moment where I start to accept this and enjoy it, and also work on the awareness and attention for these things, and also share it with others. For example, like you, people who, especially in my field, have found an own view on how to treat simple music, how to work with simple structures that are creating an enormous variety of possibilities. We had a lot of talks about that too. How much do we control this? How much do we let it just happen? What is the sound result? How can you do something like this in a band? What needs to be done more in a solo position? And all these questions, they are still for me on a very high level. And I have the chance also with my wife, Andrea, to develop more inside view on the way how a body is organized energetically and kinetically, not mainly intellectually or physically. It is more about energetic, kinetic, movement-oriented behavior.
Yeah, and that's really what I think you are a real master at, like taking what to the outside for most people, I would even say, seems like an intellectual activity. Like I have sort of like lots of contact at the moment with younger people and with YouTube and and I see that like really the main delusion I have to really say that a lot of young people have is that intellectually they understand everything, and they have this arrogance of youth, which I love. I think it's fantastic, right?
Yeah.
But as somebody who has worked through, how do you actually get there to have, like you said, like the attitude and like the non-intellectual properties to actually execute something of that, as we could say, intellectual complexity or intellectual simplicity, depending on how you're looking at it, right?
Yeah.
But it has nothing to do, like, so the intellectual understanding of it has nothing to do with the ability to execute it. And that's what I have always found so attractive about what you do, that that it's in a way it's deceptive music, or it's a deceptive kind of art. It's this cliche of somebody who has no idea about painters, let's say, going into a gallery and saying, "Oh, I could do that myself," right? So it's a little bit like that,
Well,
and
yeah, we call that in martial arts, we call that immediate feedback. Is when you stand there with your opponent and an attack is coming, you cannot explain what you do. You just have to move in a way. So usually you have freeze, um, flight, or fight. So either you're on the shock, or you're running, or you're going into the battle. But to smoothly work with the attack and do something like we do actually on stage when we play with a complex music, which is something completely different than complicated music. That's the immediate feedback on stage. And I like to have that from martial arts, which is something else than street combat or something. It's really art. It's a way of how mind and movement works together. So we should differentiate it here also. Um, so this immediate feedback is what we should be aware on stage also when we play. There is only one chance, and there you better ready. And when you play a 7 against a 5 against a 4, your mind foxes you out so quickly when you don't incorporate or embody the pattern in a way that you really can freely and effortlessly deal with it. So to summarize, simple and simple-minded is not the same. Complex and complicated is not the same. We have a lot of complicated music out there, which is interesting, but it shows that it is complicated. While a lot of our music doesn't show that it's not necessary. It should be directly and sensual and grooving and giving a connection of a common code where we actually can share a very sensual and direct community concert in a way. You don't need to be an insider, although you can dive into it and check it out on a deeper level. But as a player, of course, this awareness is knowledge is very important. I recently discovered also the difference of repetition and reiteration. So we call it sometimes looping, sometimes repetition, and in music, different music cultures, repetition is a really important term. So when something is repeated, it is clear, you understand it because it's repeated. So when you repeat it over and over again, like in minimal groove, minimal music, a lot of reductive concepts, then you should know why. And when we do that in groove music, of course, we want to have more flow. We want that the groove massage the band and the audience, and that kinetically, energetically, things are developing. So reiteration means repetition by always add something. And that's super difficult because it needs presence, but it needs also relaxation. It needs focus. It needs direction. It needs trust, but it needs also little risk. So this is very complex, and you cannot just intellectually understand that. That's a lot of training, a lot of experience, a a lot of also leaving things away to really go that way and train that.
Yeah. I have personally had this experience that at some point in my life, what you just called like complicated music, for example, was just becoming boring to me for the reason that it was like the only thing I would need in order to do the same thing, let's say, is time.
Yeah.
Right? So now that we're talking about like what you're talking about, it's not just the time, as you say, it's not just the repetition, it's the reiteration, it's where you combine the experiencing with a certain kind of awareness that you sort of like have to re-instigate all the time, right? It's not that you can expect for things to become totally automatic, or you just train or practice so much that you don't even have to be present, right? Which I think is sort of like a misunderstanding in the process of practice, where you would say, the focus should be on becoming more present, where others would say, okay, I want to be less present and still be able to perform.
Yeah.
And I find that interesting, and I don't think that one way is better than the other, really. So like my whole saying is that we need to learn to oscillate. Like we go between the state of total association with our body and also with a state of total disassociation, right? But like we need to be able to freely change between it, right? And yeah.
I found that interesting, especially the difference of the different instruments. When you're doing a physical thing on an electric guitar, for example, it's something else than when you do something on a key on an acoustic piano. It's not something else in terms of that it doesn't need semian mastership, but the movement creates something else, and the distance to the sound is different.
Yes.
And that I found very interesting. Also, guitar players usually stand. They have a lot of freedom by moving also on stage. I usually sit. Sitting is not the best position kinetically to do things very often. Actually, a lot of our problems in society come from constantly sitting in a certain way. So when you sit on a piano, this way of staying flexible but grounded is a huge topic compared to somebody who is standing with a violin or a bass or something. Also different to a drummer whose chair usually is a bit smaller than on the piano and has more direct contact to all the drums. But we need to do this thing of, going from one side to the other, which is for the back and everything quite a challenge. So that I found also very interesting when you're talking about oscillating. Who am I now as a tool for the physical organization of playing, and what's happening in my mind by listening? And we should, in any case, avoid that the challenge for the body starts to decrease the listening capacity. So the most important thing is the listening capacity. Then you better don't play and organize your listening first, and then you act agile. But this is the big challenge, that your body is ready to listen and to act, and then correspond with that with the mind.
And you've just finished writing your book about this.
Well, yeah, it's big texts are done. I'm now in the good situation to go over everything, having details, more coherence, and I also want that this can be understood. I don't want to create an esoteric way of talking about my music, but something that can be helpful for you, for also non-musicians, mainly by inspiring you to launch your own creativity and also your way of training. So what I wanted to show is in a clear but also modest way, just that's how I did it. That's not the only way, and I'm still on that way. But so far, it created a few interesting results, and these I want to share with you because you probably have something to say about it from your own background.
Yeah, that's great. So you have basically you're sharing the results, as you say, but you're also sharing ideas about the tools that you can employ to get results. Right.
Exactly.
Yeah, yeah. And in how far do you think have you kind of like created those tools yourself?
Well, I'm more shaped them. You know, I have a lot of stuff from other people, and of course, the system of reference in the book is also very important. I learned from you, from for example, from Kaspar, with whom I play since we were kids. I learned, of course, a lot from my teacher, but also from books and several sources. Also, a lot from actually a theater director Nora Somoini, who is my stepsister. I learned a lot about how actors work together in a way, you know, how they find their roles and their connections on the meta level of the roles and stuff. So I learned a lot by watching, having the chance to work with people. But I think I had a certain personal need of shaping these things and driving them into a direction that was necessary for myself. And I guess I created some results that are quite unique in the combination of these things. Not so much in that I invented this, but that I brought them together as a system of references that allow you again or somebody else to bring your own stuff in and to develop it and shape it in your way. So that's what I wanted to show. The book is not to show that I invented all of that stuff, but to more say how I worked with the system of references, what they meant to me, and how they developed into a different direction. That's very important. And with this, it also gives credit to some of the people who were mainly important for me, especially over a long period. Not so much like we meet all important figures during our life, but the people who stay, that's quite something interesting. People you find, although you have conflicts, you find ways of staying together, of still learning from each other. That's actually one of the main interesting thing also in my personal life that I found interesting, to not quit, but to find ways together when you're in a conflict.
Very good, because I think for me that's even the case with music itself. My relationship with music.
Yeah.
Or even the music I listened to when I was 10 years old, or I think it's very important to kind of like always go back and learn from the fact that you have a very long relationship.
Absolutely. That's the basic message in the book also, you know, one and one is one. That we should really check. It's never you just that did everything, invented everything, or whatever. It's always minimum another figure. That's the law of life somehow. It doesn't work otherwise. We need a listener, we need a partner on stage, we need a partner to learn, we need a partner to fight, to have a conflict. And when we learn how to work with that fruitfully, not to avoid this, there is conflict, violence, and all sorts of complex challenge. But when we learn how to deal with that and to go on and to share things in a respectful way, then I think we can maybe get wiser a bit in 20, 30 years.
I completely agree with you. However, it's also fine to, because you're the person who writes this book, right? So, and I know that you're not doing that alone. It's also a team. However, like this, I find it important to also give credit to the idea and to the, no matter how small the idea. So say you have like an exercise that your teacher showed you when you were 18, and you have taken it and you have only changed one small parameter.
Oh.
and which I'm sure there are things like this, right? So, but the fact that you have kind of like made the decision to change this and then to work with it kind of is something that I don't want to say that you need to get credit for that necessarily, but it's something that's worth presenting.
Yeah, you're part of the inspiration chain. That's
Yeah,
also one of
yeah,
the, we know the added value chain from economy. We should also be aware of all these chains of inspiration, chains of learning, um, uh, chains of respecting each other. So these are all chains, and because they connected, it's not just that they're next to each other, but this connection, that's what you were mentioning.
yeah.
You're part of that, and that has started a few million years ago, but we are still in that development, and so it's important to, as you say, appreciate your own contribution also, but be aware of that you're in a chain of contribution.
Yeah, yeah. And as a composer, Nick, like in the arts, the term that's probably used is the one that's lineage, right? Like it's a line. You're coming
Yeah,
from a line of composers,
yeah.
and and I haven't been that aware of my lineage for a while, and then I understood. Okay, that's why I'm writing this kind of music, and like for me, it's like the Hindemith line of
Yeah,
teachers.
right.
And so, what would you say is your lineage when it comes to composition?
Well, that's a big question to now sort out here. But in the book, this is one of the main topics, because the book is not so much about piano playing. It's about my background, band leading, composing, improvising together, mainly with others. And also there is a one little excursus about the groove lineage, but it's also a lot about the lineage of classical composers. Um, of course, goes back very long when we talk about pattern composing, starts in Baroque music or even earlier,
Hmm.
but then mainly coming from Stravinsky to Bartok and minimal composers, but also reductionist composers like Ligeti or Morton Feldman, who are kind of individual figures. Now, in case of my music, nobody, many people wrote about that because it was in the press text that I'm influenced by Morton Feldman, but actually don't hear it in music very obviously, because Morton Feldman's music is quite empty and beautiful. But when you read the book, you see this relation. What you said, that you change something, or your listening, or your attitude or affinity change something, can also mean that you're very inspired by one figure, but that does not necessarily mean that your music sounds like this, which is actually even better. We don't want that the music sounds exactly like this and I compose Morton Feldman music and just have a groove under it. That's not the point. We, of course, have to digest things and to develop it. And then we partly, in an ideal case, can name that lineage, and we always forget a few things. That's also normal. Um, but the it's not so good when we are a victim of this lineage and we sound like the role models or something, if there were any role models. So it's our job also to differentiate and to listen into ourselves, like we do as a composer, listen to the material.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, absolutely true. This, but again, like I can understand that people who are not themselves, and it's difficult to put words for this, like say artistically inclined, or who don't understand that they also do make creative contributions to the world.
Yeah,
That some people like that may confuse the sound of your music with what your influences may have been, right? And then it turns out like you never listened to whoever, right?
yeah,
You have even no idea that there's somebody who's using like a similar voicings on the piano, for example. You don't have to know that. So, but your influence comes from, and comes from, like in your case, the minimal music, yes, but also funk music, and a certain understanding of groove, which and this is like the next topic I want to talk about.
Yeah.
Like what is the well, I wanted to use the word abstraction, but or maybe that's totally wrong. Like maybe what is concretely what makes your kind of groove, your interpretation of the funk influences?
Well, I liked also already as a small kid rhythms. So till I was quite old, I didn't like ballads, for example. I just liked the beat. And when I think back, and I had to really think back also to my childhood when I wrote the book, I was in the beginning inspired or drawn to the piano because I saw somebody playing boogie woogie. And actually, that's pattern music totally. It's a kinetic way of organizing movement, sensual impact of grooves. And it developed for me then into jazz and Brazilian music, Bartok, Gershwin, and then it spread it out to all sorts of groove things. I relatively late actually liked pure funk, like James Brown's funk. It was a bit for me too powerful when I was a child in a certain way. I discovered that later, this simplicity and directness in funk music. So first of all was my affinity to rhythmic music. That's also why I'm careful in naming funk as a main influence for the whole music. I'm just calling Ronin Zen funk because it has this attitude also because of the way Kasper is able to drum and with his knowledge about funk music. And I liked it also. But what I were always a bit where it stopped was when it came to that more crowd-oriented, clap your hands way of building things up, or song-oriented funk music. And I liked always, for example, I studied a long time as a teenager, late teenager, these bootleg videos from Prince when he did a show after the show where they sometimes for an hour just had similar grooves transforming into a next one, morphing into next one with suddenly cuts where nothing was happening. So this was a shocking ritualistic setup how to play funk. And of course, he did not do that in front of the pop audience, but he did it for the people who like that. It's almost a special attitude that you like that stuff, and I like this ritualistic way of repetitive energy load up in funk music that you actually find in a few that a few bands do this. And of course also our culture and our circumstances here are very different. We had a club here called Bacillus where a guy was the head and somehow the initiator. He had that club very long, Beat Kennel. And in this club, we had really night-long sessions. And although this was officially a jazz club, he always checked that not too many people play solos. So that more the groove and the community thing was there. We had a lot of international jazz musicians or groove musicians also there passing by. It was a bit another time than today where everything is more academically organized. And Casper was in there first as a drummer, as a very young drummer. I think he was 14 or so, or even 13. And I came in there with about 14, 15 later, then half a year later. And we jammed a lot. And there was already a lot of pattern music. And this guy was also an amateur drummer. And the best groove he could do was in 7. So he was not a drummer that actually could play a lot of odd meters, but he had a certain movement, and this 7 beat was his thing. So that's why we jammed a lot with that 7 thing. And in there, suddenly also it was not important where is this coming from. It was sometimes para-tribal-ish organization. It was just important to forget time and hang out there. And a lot of that ritualistic energy in groove music inspired me a lot. The point for me that I found later was that very often the rhythm section, bass player and drummer, are just playing something for the others to play over. Although the interlocking way with guitars, piano, and so was also interesting, but nobody expected that a drum beat is composed or a bass line is really composed. Usually the bass player or the drummer contributed themselves these beats, and also in our music, of course, Casper and several bass players contributed a lot. But for me, at a certain point with the consciousness of composing that I learned actually also on the music academy, I went more and more into beat balances, ways of how beats and bass lines are organized. What's the meaning of a bass line when you leave away the melody and all of that stuff that we find, as you named it already before a lot, or in your music, it was also there very early, like in the record you did with Sonar on my label. So these ideas were there. You found them in minimal music. You found it on bootlegs, in jams and stuff. So it was all there. But to bring it together and then to think about it, like one newspaper once said, I think it was meant ironically in that time, that I'm a scientist of groove. And that's almost a paradox. Either it grooves or otherwise it's science. But to bring that together, I like that, because to work on beats, interlocking cycles under a microscope was for me something that was one of the solutions to go on with music and shape it into the way I felt comfortable, and a music that also wanted to listen to.
So in practical terms, just when your band, let's say Ronin, plays together, how elastic is the time for in your experiencing, I mean, right? Yeah. Can you say something about that?
Well, there is time and time. First of all, one is how elastic is the time that, let's say I have a piece that is in quarter note 80, and it needs a certain flow. It's composed like this. Then we work on it, and can also change over time, historic time, how we play. The module can change, has usually a history in a band history also. So we can shape it depending on the level we actually can feel the piece and understand it. But then there is the time, how we phrase, how we organize, how we move as a band by interpreting the measurement of time, like the pulse. And we are in a phase where we really reflect on a higher level. That's also one part in the book, actually, the relation between a bar, measurement, pulse, rhythm in that, absolute measurement of time, relative time, phrasing, the feel of time that should be incorporated in the band as an organism. And then all these relations, how we can play with that, for example, on the level of ghost notes or the level of stretching, and one plays a bit more laid back, the other more in front. The mix between binary and ternary phrasing and all of that stuff. So that's one of the main aspects, and I think of the main impacts also our bands make, to really work with that, not so much with an intellectual, interesting compositional idea or an interesting melody or an interesting solo, but with these in-between things that happen when people play musical material finally really as a performance. And you cannot compose that. That's impossible. You can write about it, or you can talk about it, and you can experience this with the band. So I find that very fascinating. That's the border of written and oral culture, and that's one of the main subjects in the way I work. To work exactly on that, and to even go deeper and deeper into questions of time. How can we feel that in almost three-dimensional, in being in a piece as a space, to see things coming, to lean a bit forward, in relation to the drummer, or to have the snare forward and the bass drum a bit more back and all of that stuff. So I love that, and the people in the band have such a long history together and the trust that talking about that things is one of our main activity actually when we rehearse.
And just thinking back on a record like Randori, for example, compared with how your band started to sound maybe in 2014, or like there, you know, I'm just looking from the outside, and obviously I've seen you and heard you play a lot of times, but there are also phases when I don't hear the band at all, and then like I hear you guys again,
Right.
and I see like there's this new understanding, there's this new way of actually playing, like literally playing with certain parameters of the music that are not even obvious that they are there before you actually start playing with them.
Right.
So and that's sort of like one of the main developments I see in your music is like, if you, like I said, Randori versus Avase, right? Like it's this really the result of being present, of becoming more and more present with what you do, or you could say more aware. And what happens is that sort of like this newly gained processing power that you somehow opening up in your mind, or you know, in your body, as you say, and suddenly you start working with more details, and also even just in the way that you do the ambient interludes between songs, I think they have changed considerably, like really a lot. And I've always been a really deep listener, let's say, and like now I think that's I just find that fascinating, because I look at you as somebody that I follow. You know, I follow you as an artist, and I'm more interested in the process of how in observing how your process unfolds, than in the actual results at any point in time. You know, and so there's a lot of process in your music. Also, the fact that you guys started having the Mondays like 15 years ago or something. I'm not exactly sure. And I think I first went to a Mondays concert at Bacillus 2007, or I think it was 2007. And this dedication, this commitment to keeping this initial path that you took alive for such a long time. What kind of, if at all, compromises did you have to make in your life? Like, how many times did you have to say no to something, for example? Right?
Well, that's the major lesson, actually, to learn to say no in every phase. And it also challenged me a lot. It was a big risk. I also started doing martial arts and meditation because I feared like being alone with the stuff I do. I find that very important to take care of the old pieces. I want also to do a backwards learning. I had a lot of discussions with many different artists, and many want to go forward, learn forward, and also change constantly. As the example named is Miles Davis, who said, "I don't play old stuff; it's gone." And I have more the idea of a globe of learning. So a lot of the pieces in the beginning, and of for example the record Rondor you mentioned as a radical first Ronin record, is still very important for me. I learned still a lot from that record, and the music is more than the composer or the band. It is a certain being that speaks, and sometimes it speaks more, sometimes less. But we as a band learned also many pieces that didn't sound in the beginning, and I was also under attack as a composer that the piece might be not really good. For example, Module 47 sounded like a jazz school etude when we played it with the metric modulation. It was almost stupid. So we didn't put it on on hold on. But then we took it again, and suddenly we started to understand it, and then it came on to Lyria, then it disappeared again. It was one of our hits finally. Then it disappeared again, and now we started to play it again in a quartet because we had it as a quintet there, and new aspects were opening. So for what I'm really thankful is that I was so insecure about how quickly to go on. I wanted to take care about my own development, not so much to say this is invented by me, but to learn something. And I discovered really that in this way of working is such a variety of learning as a musician, questions of time, questions of rhythms, questions of orientation, questions of phrasing, dynamics, dramaturgy, that it's really worth it to do also learning into all directions of your own history. And that's really interesting then to compare Rondori with Avase, for example, because there must be a shift into new land of new, like on Avase, the 58 is, I wanted also to challenge Casper and the players by having something, but I wanted to challenge myself by being even more simple than before, because this 5 against 7 is not really complex in terms of patterns. Like on Lyria, you have much more complex stuff happening in terms of composition, but the result and the way to play it is much more complex. How to move in that three-dimensional space of these multi-dimensional patterns. So this process is very important, and I appreciate from the very beginning, from even pre-beginning. Module 15, for example, that is on Rondori, goes back to 1992 or something, to a jam that was a piece that was called Go Between, very early, where 5 against 4 against 7 against 9 was a topic in a more funk sense. So I find that still very fascinating. I wouldn't say this is over or something.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's something that we have in common, is this idea to go back to, you could say, just the basics or the rudiments exactly. Of one's thinking, or the rudiments of one's compositional history, right? And then see, like, how can this old thought reflect on my current being in the world, and what else can I draw from this? I find it like maybe the most satisfying aspect of being an artist, that I can work on that everything I do seems to an extent as an accumulation, but it's not really an accumulation. It is like everything gets spread wider. So it's not a hill or a mountain of work that I create. It's as if it's kind of like spreading out.
Yeah, it's a universe. It spreads out as a universe. It's also like the basics is in training, martial arts training, a lot of Japanese arts or handcraft arts also in Europe and all over the planet. It's also always about basics, because we're humans and no machines. So you always train the basics. That's normal. It's a bit a different idea than, it's more an evolutionary idea, based on the basics, than an avant-gardistic idea of change, Western idea of constant change. It's an idea of constant connection and evolution. So this is very important, and we need to be also as modest as possible to always relate to that basics. If you didn't do that in the training properly, then you can also not do the rest. So it's a body, it's not a machine. You cannot just press the knob and then you're already there.
Yeah, exactly. And that's where the intellect often is the problem, when the intellect kind of like gives you this delusion that you already know. Right, but the body does not follow, or is
it's like when somebody's coming into Aikido training and you still do the beginning called Tai no Henko. It's a basic exercise of feeling the body and, going out of the line. And somebody says after a few trainings or half a year, nice, I checked how Aikido happens. Now I do a bit of tennis and, I can learn there also a lot. Of course, that's true. But probably you understand that basic exercise more and more the more you relate it to your development. And that's the interesting idea.
Yes. So you're turning 50 this year, right?
True. Yeah.
Yeah. Going well. What plans do you have for the second half of your life?
Well, you never know if it's the second half, so I just take every day how it comes and try to finish things. And as I said earlier, every day a little bit is better than do all at once. And I experience in my life also so far a lot of challenges that they suddenly show up out of the blue, and we need to be thankful for every second we can dedicate to music. Families, healthy, developing. One thing is to write a book, but another thing is to write a book and doing recordings while you have 3 kids and they need to go to gymnasium, they have exams, they want to eat, they want to be in contact with you, they want to play instruments, and we want to support them and stuff like this. So that's the daily balance, and I'm still training to get that done. Oh, yeah.
A question that I get asked a lot is, Markus, do you ever sleep? And
that's an important question. I actually love sleeping because I think we have a wrong understanding of sleeping. I think for creative people, sleeping is extremely important, and also the way how you sleep and what's your relationship to that. So I learned to also respect a lot of sleeping time for my creative process. And we can learn actually a lot here from professional sports, where so far sleeping is an important tool to bring your body into a different way of understanding itself. To say it simple, I read once that Swiss tennis player Roger Federer sleeps 11 hours regularly. Of course, this is on a physical training level and match level very much. But as musicians, we underestimate our strong presence that is somewhere between chess and boxing. Like one of Shaw's record is called, chess boxing. That's what we do, and it needs a lot of presence. And if we take it serious, we have to take care. And that's the right question. How much and how do you sleep?
Yes. But you're not asking me now, I hope.
Well, I can tell you that when the child is older, it gets better.
Yes. Yeah, wonderful. I maybe one last question. How does let's just say we do, and let's include everybody else who resonates with what we do.
Yeah.
How does this relate to healing and mental well-being?
Well, I learned, for example, in that situation now, that a lot of people I know, like you, are quite balanced, although this is a challenge, because they do what they love and they do it on a high level of craftsmanship, dedication, attention, awareness, and also love for the thing they do and the community that shares that, including the family. So if you ask me if this is not the most important thing to heal and to be balanced, what we call, then I don't know. I think the way we work and the way we reflect the work, and also with the modesty of staying really attentive and in training, is very important for healing, in the sense of finding your stability day by day. And finally, if you ask me directly about my music, then everybody can think and hear and feel about the music what they like. But my main goal is to give a positive, challenging, but also essential energy that launches yourself and your ideas, and also your capacity to inspire other people. That's healing in the sense of starting to think about what is really essential.
Yeah.
And this sounds so simple and sounds almost like a management seminar, but I mean it very basic, like you called it before, basics. We should do that every day. That's clear. And I guess many people avoid that question every day for several reasons. I have to ask them because otherwise my whole system breaks very quickly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Wonderful, Nik. Yeah, so I would appreciate if we could maybe, talk again in 6 months or so, and continue where we left off today.
Good, we do that.
Yes.
And thank you also very much. And I find it inspiring because you also have a deeper understanding and a lot of experiences yourself. And then a talk like this is more than talking about your new record. It's about why we make music and why this is so essential for us and why this can be inspiring for a lot of other people. So thank you very much for giving a lot of effort into that, and also do that with other people and share that with the people who might resonate for that.
You're welcome, and I'm happy to actually that we actually talked about your new record. Yeah. And I'm looking forward to it.
Good. Thank you. I'm looking forward to your feedback.
Yes. Thank you very much, Nik, and see you soon.
You. Okay, yeah. See you soon. Yeah. Bye.
Bye-bye.